Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends and the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show. We'll be taking a look at something called native advertising. Find out what it is and when does it start to become deceptive. It's something that's become quite a talking point and one that even saw the Press Ombudsman having to make a ruling on recently. Rajesh Sundaram, yeah, that's the name of a former editor at the Television News Channel ANN7. He was giving testimony at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture this past week, saying how former President Jacob Zuma was significantly involved in the building of the station, even giving it its name. And how the SABC was involved in a transaction that was described by ANN7 as a sweet deal. Well, these are just some of the stories that we'll be tracking on the show. But first, let's take a look at the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. So, the Sunday Times is leading with yet another story about the embattled ANC Secretary General, Ace Magashule, saying that he appears to have invented the agreement on the Reserve Bank. The paper suggests that Magashule may have inserted parts of a damaging ANC NEC Lekgotla statement on the Reserve Bank that threw the rand into turmoil this past week. The City Press headline says the hitman claims that SABC boss was targeted. This refers to what is believed to have been an assassination attempt on the SABC's audit executive Thami Lekgotla on Friday night. The article says that one of the hitmen nabbed was sent by a mystery lady to kill Lekgotla, who has been part of producing about 180 forensic reports on wrongdoing at the corporation. The Sunday Independent has quite an explosive headline claiming that the President Ramaphosa, inadvertently misled Parliament and the Public Protector. The Public Protector apparently has found that the President is guilty of money laundering. The Sunday Tribune's top story focuses on the continued violence that has seen about 60 trucks torched in the past 3 weeks, with warnings from economists that a looming wildcat strike scheduled for July the 18th could derail the country's already teetering economy. Now, the Weekend Argus is also leading with a story regarding President Ramaphosa inadvertently misleading Parliament when he failed to declare a 500,000 rand donation to his ANC presidential campaign from Gavin Watson, who you'll remember is the boss of the controversial services company Bosasa. Right, so there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping me make sense of all of these stories, my guest editor is Sophie Mkwena, who's the SABC foreign editor, and I'm hoping that we might still have Mondli Makanya, who's the editor-in-chief at the City Press. A very good morning to you, Sophie. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter. Good morning, Papa.
Great. Now, we start our discussions today with a term that many of us probably are not quite familiar with, native advertising. But the question is, what on earth is it? Well, it's described as the use of paid ads that match the look and feel and function of the media format in which they appear. The key to native advertising is that it's non-disruptive and exposes consumers to advertising content that doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. So in theory, it isn't illegal, but when does this type of advertising cross a line and become deceptive? This was a subject of a recent ruling by the Press Ombudsman that was triggered by a complaint by Rhodes University School of Journalism and Media Studies lecturer Simon Pamphilon. He joins me now via Skype to tell us why he was so concerned about native advertising. Let's say good morning to you, Simon. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter. Thanks for inviting me.
And we're also joined in studio by the Press Ombud herself, Pippa Green. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Morning, Peter. Morning, Simon.
How's the job going?
It's hard.
All right, let's start with you, Simon. And so what happened was there was a special feature, I think in the Sunday Times. The feature involves 3 stories. Premier Makure extols the high quality of life in Gauteng. Township businesses paid 22 billion rand for their services, and changing young lives 500,000 at a time. Why was this such a bother to you that you went all the way to the effort of lodging a complaint with the Press Ombud?
Well, it started when I was reading the story. In fact, I was reading it online at first in Press Reader. So seeing the newspaper page, but as a newspaper page. And I saw this lead story and I was reading it, and then 2 paragraphs in, I thought, hang on a second, what's going on here? And looked a bit more around the page, and then I saw only after that that little strap line saying brought to you by the Gauteng provincial government. And I looked at the page as a whole and I thought, no, this isn't right. Presenting a page 3. Now, I know the Sunday Times no longer really uses their page 3 for hard news stories. I'm not sure why, but they don't. But to present basically an advert, a paid-for advert, as news on page 3, looking exactly like all your other editorial content, your other news content, with the same devices, the only difference being a change of font in the lead headline, and that strapline saying brought to you by the Gauteng provincial government. Now, to my mind, that wasn't acceptable. That was a clear breach of the code, saying advertising material must be kept distinct from editorial content.
All right. So what could be the danger of this blurring of these lines between advertising and advertorial?
Well, I think the biggest danger is that people read that kind of fluff and think it's true. It's got the credibility of the Sunday Times news reporting. And especially coming two months before the elections, and you've got this full-page set of articles saying the Gauteng provincial government is doing a fantastic job. The Premier is doing a fantastic job. Now, if that's true, and your journalists want to go out and write stories like that, that's absolutely fine. But if you're being paid to say that, that's a problem, because is it true?
All right, so you took this to the Press Ombud. The Press Ombud joins us now, and Pippa, this lands on your desk, and this is new territory that we're kind of traversing here. Take us through the process that you applied to get to a judgment, because in the end you judged in favour of the paper.
Yes, but only just. If you read the judgment, there's quite a strong warning in there. Let me say 2 things. 1, it was my first ruling. 2, I was very grateful to Simon for bringing it up, because I had exactly the same reaction to the page. I've seen those kind of pages before. What saved the Sunday Times and why I thought that if it went on appeal one might lose was that strap at the top. I also read the first 2 paragraphs and saw that. But when I looked at this, I did some research about native advertising in other parts of the world. And it's extraordinary what's actually happened, because in publications with the kind of gravitas and credibility of the New York Times or the Atlantic, for instance, used an entire piece on the Church of Scientology, which is at odds, completely at odds with its kind of readership, as a native advertising piece. And you had to look quite carefully to see that it was a sponsored article. The New York Times did a similar thing with a cover on their magazines about women in prison, and it was actually paid for by Netflix. I think Orange is the New Black. So I'm not saying it's not a problem. Simon is absolutely right, it is a problem, and I hope that what my ruling says to the Sunday Times, which they've acknowledged, is watch out for this kind of thing. The fonts were not exactly the same, but they were really similar. I did check that. They weren't identical, but they were very similar. And the special reporter is a native advertising department. We have such a thing now in the Sunday Times. So advertising is using the newspaper's credibility to put its message across.
So Simon raised an interesting thought, but when you say special reporter, I mean, I could say that about myself at the SABC if I'm covering a special story. So how does that differentiate it from a normal journalist and a native advertiser?
Well, there were two things. One, there's no designation in editorial for special reporter in the Sunday Times. The second thing that they argued was they didn't have the news strap on that page. So it just, as I say, the line was very blurry in there. But you know, we're getting used to the, Peter, what you said earlier, we're getting used to the fact that reporters' credibility is used to push commercial, or, you know, and sometimes other agendas. So for instance, we are absolutely used to talk show hosts reading aloud ads on insurance with the same passion that they might talk about the repo rate, you know, or the debate over the Reserve Bank. Okay, they are not technically have the same obligations as journalists in that they have more leeway, but they are, the same principle applies. You're using the credibility of the medium to push an ad, and advertisers are prepared to pay for that, and we all know where the media industry is financially. So it's a difficult conundrum.
So Simon, in the end, did you agree with Pippa's judgment, or do you think more could have been said or done?
I wasn't entirely satisfied with it, for the one main reason being that, well, it to some extent gives the newspaper an out to say, okay, we're going to do it again. It's fine, we can carry on like this. But as Pippa mentioned, her dismissal of my complaint came with a stern warning to the newspaper to take this into consideration, to be careful about these things. And I was also quite pleased to read that some editorial people at the newspaper were uncomfortable with the way that page was presented. And I think that's an important thing about the press code, is it doesn't only give readers an avenue for addressing grievances, it's also a means of journalists, editorial people, protecting themselves from interference by management and marketing and advertising people, and saying, well, actually, no, we can't do this because it's not really that ethical.
So we're talking a lot about print at the moment, but a lot of this native advertising is actually happening more and more online. And I saw some research going back as far as 2016, where Mark Zuckerberg said that native advertising, particularly online, is going to be 62 or 63% of all advertising. That's quite scary then, if we think about the amount of articles that we're going to come across. We're not going to be able to tell the difference going forward.
Can I mention that one of the articles, one of the things mentioned in the Sunday Times' defense of their page was the Stanford University report on native advertising. Now, I didn't think it really applied in this case, because that report is talking almost entirely about digital advertising. And making the statement that people reading online can easily distinguish between advertising and editorial content. And I think that's true. I think it's a different thing when you're reading news online and suddenly you come across an advert. You don't mistake it for editorial content. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No, that we can still hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought we'd got interrupted. Yeah. So that's a different kind of thing, and I have no problem with that sort of interspersion. I think when it's driven by algorithms, you end up with some very unpleasant kinds of. Well, you have a story on a particular kind of car that's caught alight, and up pops an advert alongside that story or in that story, selling that model of car. Those kinds of things, which I'm seeing increasingly frequently online.
It's quite scary, actually, just how much they're watching us. I mean, I was watching a movie the other day, and one of the actresses was name was Paris, and I started to type her name Paris, and instead of talking about the city, it talked about her, the actress, and I thought, how on earth could they have known this? But somehow they are tuning in. But this native advertising now is playing out in many media, and as a press ombud, this is going to be a challenge for you as well, to try and kind of navigate your way through this.
I think it's a real challenge, and I think one has to balance the need for the media to be financially sustainable with the challenge of ethics and editorial independence. And there was a wonderful, I'm sure Simon's seen it, but when I was researching this, when he made the complaint, I found a fantastic clip of John Oliver, the British comedian in the United States. It's quite a famous thing on native advertising. But one of the things he says, you were talking about internet advertising and why so much of it is native. And his theory is if the banner advertising, people don't open. So if you do open it, you get a message, this is a joke, on your screen saying, are you okay? You must have passed out and hit your head on your keypad, shall I call an ambulance? Because people don't open it. Yeah. So what do you do to pay for news collection and news reporting? And I think it's actually a discussion that we need to have more widely with the media industry and with editors and with people like Simon, to say, how do we pay for news in a kind of a sustainable and ethical way, so that these lines are not crossed. I also feel quite strongly about it, and I think that it's important in the broadcast media as well that we make those distinctions. That journalists are journalists for and foremost. They don't do ads, they don't read ads, they don't act in ads, which has happened in the past.
All right, and perhaps a final thought, Simon. What could make things clearer? Because this is what Pippa has warned the Sunday Times to do. What does clearer mean in distinguishing between these two?
Well, I think we're going to have to work towards a definition of what clearly distinct does mean. But I think one thing they certainly can do is just not try and make the page look like an ordinary news page. And changing your lead headline, using a different typeface for that, does not change the look and feel of the page. The look and feel is a totality of all sorts of things. The textures, the pull quotes, how you present your statistics, the running headers, all of those kinds of things, which were identical in this case. I think the Sunday Times said they licensed typefaces. They can't just use any kind of typeface, to make it look different, but they could certainly lay it out differently.
And the Pippa, final thought, and I suppose the whole point of native advertising is to make it look like it's a real story.
You're right on the credibility, or the editorial credibility of the newspaper, certainly. There's one more point I'd like to make, actually, and it's about the content of that Gauteng story. And it's this, there actually were quite interesting stories in those three stories about the small business, the township economy, the youth. And what I find odd is that they actually had to put an advert in rather than speaking to reporters and having the kind of communication lines with the newsroom that a journalist could look at it critically.
All right. To both of my guests, Simon Pamphilon, thank you very much indeed for joining us all the way from Makanda. And Pippa Green, our new press ombud, thanks so much for coming through.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, okay, so that's native advertising. I hope you can start to make a discerning view of some of the things that you see in your papers more and more. And, well, just to let you know, the Editor-in-Chief of the City Press, Mondli Makanya, has just joined us, and he'll be part of my panel. Mondli, a very good morning to you. Give us a wave. Go on, put your hand up. Wave. There you go. That's Mondli Makanya. We'll be chatting to him after the break.
Be ready when the future calls. To share your ideas, your talents. Celebrate moments that matter. Nurture your family and community. Passion, determination, hard work. That's what drives you. Imagine a bank that's passionate about supporting your growth, that joins you on your financial journey and is part of your future. That's Ubank, growing with you.
Every high-profile court case, every breaking news story.
The manner in which these audits are done. Why is it targeted to blacks and Indians?
Every inquiry. We are there, front and center. We also bring you an hour-long breakdown of the day's markets, simplifying the numbers for your better understanding.
When everyone is too excited about the market, that's normally when things start turning.
All this and more. This is On Point.
All right, so welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and just before we get into our next discussion, I just want to have a chat or get a comment from our guest editors about this native advertising. And I'll start with you, Editor-in-Chief of the City Press, Mondli Makanya. There is pressure for newspapers to get advertising, and this pressure can mean succumbing to this. Your thoughts about native advertising and whether there's a place for it in the media?
Yeah, no, you know what, it is a big problem. It's becoming a big problem because advertisers know, companies know that they have us over a stick. Advertising is drying up, and they can actually put a gun to your head and say, make your pages look like, make our advert look like your normal news. Yeah. And unfortunately, that particular case was so bad. I mean, like the case that people was had to rule on. It was so bad because it was a genuine thing. You could see that that this was a genuine thing, that you could. That it's the premier, it's the worker counting, and it just says it could have been an ordinary news story that they could have just put forward as an ordinary news story. But then, because they had to ramp it up, and make the reader believe that we are so good, and the newspaper actually wanted the money. The company wanted the money. You know, we've all had to put in place policies to make sure that we are not cheating our readers and our viewers, because that, at the end of the day, that is the most important person.
All right, Sophie, you're a broadcast journalist, and what I'm going to ask you is, and I'm not sure whether it's even native advertising, but one of the things that we're seeing more and more is real-life journalists using their real-life names in fictional dramas, in soap operas. And I wonder if there isn't a danger there that you're legitimizing the soap opera or the drama, and then the credibility of the institution that this journalist belongs to could be questioned. Is that something we should be concerned about, do you think?
We should be. I think as times evolve, we have to look at different policies to ensure that we continue to ensure that media is independent and impartial, and the credibility of any institution or individuals who are media officials is maintained. And therefore, I mean, we live in a different age. There's always a way for advertisers to manipulate us. And we must, as media houses or media practitioners, always review policies to ensure that we are not found wanting. For an example, Mondli has just pointed out that based on the challenges of resources, many media houses can be found wanting, and therefore we have to find a way to ensure that as much as we are experiencing a drying of resources, we are not found wanting. I mean, the live reads on radio and television can be one example where a media house can be found wanting, but it's not deliberate. We just have to up our game. We have to change things. We have to review our policies and how we do business. All right,
and then perhaps a final thought. Often we can't get to a certain location because of resources. I don't know, the department of something will say, we will fly you there. We need you to cover the story. Does that now start to cross a line, do you think, or not?
No, look, I mean, like, it has been done for a very long time. Yeah. It does cross a line, but I think it has to be made clear that you were flown there by so and so. I mean, for instance, there's a thing now with the presidency, when the president goes to visit, let's say, goes to China or whatever. Normally, he now takes a group of journalists on the presidential plane, and And South Africa needs to know what the president is doing over there. You are not there to do propaganda for the presidency. You can still do your journalism as you wish, but but you're saying that you are conveying to your readers and to your viewers. But then I think if Nestle flies you somewhere to their factory, it's important that at the bottom you say Nestle paid for the strip.
All right, and that's not something we're seeing all the time, though.
Yes, I think I agree with Mondli. For an example, I mean, South Africans would want to know what government is doing. You know, when these ministers are going outside the country, what are they doing? But as a journalist, when you are there, you do the story. It doesn't mean you'll be running around behind that minister. You are there, and you can also do other stories. I want to make an example. We went to Uganda. It was one of those sponsored trips. Because of the political challenges in Uganda, we ensured that we speak to ordinary people, particularly the media practitioners, who are complaining that the government in Uganda is kind of stifling the debate and there's no media freedom. So you don't just go there and just be a propagandist.
Right.
You do stories and you speak to all newsmakers. You are not going to cover just that person. You do all stories.
Be true to the story, be true to your audience.
And it gets tough, though, as you say, when your organization doesn't have huge money, huge budgets, you can be tempted. All right, let's move on to something else now. This past week, the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture heard 2 days of testimony from a former editor of the Television News Channel ANN7. Rajesh Sundaram told the Commission how the news channel was established in 2013, apparently with the significant hand of former President Jacob Zuma. Now, according to Sundaram, Zuma was heavily involved in the building of the station from the ground up, so much so, according to Sundaram, that Zuma even named the station. In his testimony, he further revealed how the station managed to buy hundreds of hours of archive footage from the SABC at a fraction of the cost.
Duduzani's involvement in the setting up of the station or the running of the business was minimal, I would say. You know, there was just one meeting where he had a small appearance, and there was not much in terms of business that he contributed to that meeting. But President Zuma was very much involved in the running of the station, in the sense that there were regular review meetings where a status update was given to him, and he would give feedback to that as well. Also, confidential information, which I, as somebody who set up many stations across in India, would know. You know, there's some confidential information which you don't really give out so early in the project. That was disclosed to the president. Now, I would have thought, as somebody when I did not know that of the president's son's involvement in this, I thought it was a little funny that you would hand out a document which had all the secrets of the project to a public office and leave a presentation there with all those details, with so many people in his office would have access to that, and it could clearly have leaked. But they didn't really seem to care. I mean, they trusted him 100%, and it was only later on that I realized that it's because he had a much bigger interest in the station.
All right, Rajesh Sundaram testifying at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. Okay, an interesting 2 days that we heard some interesting and at times what could be described as explosive testimony. Let me start with you, Sophie. What came through from the inquiry and the testimony that concerned you straight away?
Well, the fact that you have these allegations, we will hear from the chair of the commission finally whether there is a truth to this whole thing, when all stakeholders have been questioned or have given right to reply. What concerns me was that you had the head of state being involved in setting up of a media house, and therefore clearly whoever was involved in that process would have been compromised. In other words, it would have been very difficult to take independent decisions. Therefore, I think it's something that we really have to discuss as media houses.
Does that constitute state capture, Mondli, where you have a head of state in bed with a private institution in setting up a newspaper, television channel? I guess it has influence over the president, but the president also is a shareholder, and maybe he captured the private institution.
No, the interesting thing is that, Zuma has been saying over time that I don't know what I've done, and I don't know what I've done, and he has said before that he has not been implicated at all in anything at the Zondo Commission. I don't know which Zondo Commission he's talking about, because everybody has mentioned him. But this week was so stark because it showed the Gupta's control over him. There was one particular incident that Sundaram mentioned, where he says the Gupta brothers were waiting for Zuma at the presidential residence, and he was still in a meeting with some ministers, and they got impatient because he was taking a long time and they'd been waiting for too long, and they threatened to leave. And then Zuma came out, and it shows you the relationship between the two. He was the servant, and they were the masters. So it was a capture of the presidency, it was a capture of the state, a capture of the highest ranking citizen in the country by that family. I don't think it's just a question of a private entity. I think it was a family, and their capture of the president enabled them to spread their tentacles throughout society. I think in the case of ANN7, the setting up of ANN7, he enabled them to get the station, which was essentially a money laundering crooked enterprise, essentially. And then obviously there are a whole lot of other state-owned entities that he gave them access to.
And I suppose at the end of the day, you mentioned it, advertising, because at the end of the day, you set up these channels, and how they make their money, and the New Age newspaper is government spend. And there were stories that the president at times could have influenced how much advertising was put in these newspapers. And I suppose that's where it starts to become more practical in terms of capturing public funds.
Yes, in terms of government spend on advertising, you can be able to dispense patronage, clearly. I mean, we know, and as journalists, we know that everyone would want to have that slice of cake, in the advertised spend from government. But the same people who are giving you that money might have influence in terms of how you project them, because it's very difficult when you know that you're dependent on a particular person to be very critical. Therefore, it is important that we continuously look at ourselves, how we do business, as I indicated before. But I don't want to say much about President Jacob Zuma, former President Jacob Zuma. ANC must take responsibility. They knew pre-2008 that President Jacob Zuma's judgment can be questionable. He's got poor judgment. Sometimes how he does things, you can't have that kind of a person as a head of state. When you internally as an organization, you have observed your members that Sophie Mukwena has got limitations on this, she's got limitations on this, and then you decide to make Sophie Mukwena CEO of the SABC. So I'm just saying ANC must take responsibility in terms of where it aired in its what we call policy of deployment of its cadres, because at times they didn't really look at the capability and the strengths of people, because branches can make any pronouncement, but whatever they make, you must ensure that it's practical, it's not going to lead to disaster. Therefore, we always complain about President Jacob Zuma. What did we do as a country? But secondly, particularly the party itself. I mean, all these allegations, before 2008, people were fully aware that there are certain things that he can be able to take a clear, good judgment over, but at times, there are limitations. So the ANC must take responsibility.
Okay, Mandi.
Just to put it more plainly, they no longer put a crook in charge of the country. I think that's...
No, but that's not my word.
No, but yes. Sophie is absolutely correct. I mean, I think before Polokwane, everybody knew that the man was crooked. And then the ANC put him in charge of made him president of the party. 2009, the electorate of South Africa then gave him the reins to power. So I think in as much as we say the ANC must take responsibility, the people of this republic should also take responsibility.
Okay, just to say clearly, categorically, he hasn't been convicted of any crime at this stage, and therefore your term crooked is your opinion, which is fine.
No, exactly. It is not opinion of the SABC, it is the opinion of the person who said it.
Okay,
but also bear in mind, we are still waiting for Judge Zondo to really make a clear pronouncement in terms of who's found wanting in this whole matter. And those matters can still be taken to court and be challenged. And you have the lower courts, you have the Supreme Court, you have the Constitutional Court. Only then we can say, yes, so and so is like this.
All right, okay. Well, we're going to pause for thought, and when we come back, we'll start looking at some of the newspapers, and we'll start actually with the City Press, because we've got their editor-in-chief in studio today.
Be ready when the future calls. To share your ideas, your talents. Celebrate moments that matter. Nurture your family and community. Passion, determination, hard work. That's what drives you. Imagine a bank that's passionate about supporting your growth, that joins you on your financial journey and is part of your future. That's you Bank, growing with you.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now it's time for us to take a look at our Sunday newspapers, and today we're in the very fortunate situation of having one of the editors-in-chief of one of the Sunday newspapers, Mondli Makanya, take us through the City Press headline. Hitman claims SABC boss was targeted.
Yeah, well, we were having a conversation about it offline, and Sophie has a different view on the story, and she will come back. But basically, what the story is saying is that the attempted hijacking, what seemed to be an attempted hijacking on the head of internal audit, Zigote, of SABC, was in fact not an attempted hijacking; that it was a hit. The person concerned, because he fired back and the person was injured, and the person actually has been in police custody, and he has said that no, they did not want the car, they actually were sent to take him out. It appears that he has been in charge of a whole lot of the cleanup process around forensic audits and reports that have gone on in this building that we're in, about what happened during the dark days of the past and some looting.
So did you get this from Likode himself, from the police, from
we've
the
spoken
hitman?
very widely, including the police. I mean, the police have said this to us very solidly, and I mean, we would not have gone this strongly if it was just a street gossip. I mean, actually, we have it on very good authority that this is the line of investigation that the police are pursuing.
All right, so Sophie, you've been around the SABC a long time, and when this kind of thing happens, what comes to mind for you?
Well, what comes to mind is, I think it was in 2009 when one of our colleagues was harassed and beaten up at the parking lot here, because those people later said to her, it was reported in newspapers. I don't know how far true is that, because it didn't go to court. You know, sometimes it's your word against my word. They said to her, sorry, we were actually looking for Sophie Mukwena and Miranda Stradom.
Wow.
You'd recall it was during that standoff within the ANC, where people always lump you to certain factions, and when you don't want to toe the line, you become a victim. So it reminds me of that incident. It was reported. You can go to Google. It was in the newspapers. You have this one. And also you have now 2 newspapers taking different lines. You have the Sunday World saying it was a hijacking. You have the City Press saying it was a hit because of what he has been doing, and of course he's been doing a good job, and he must be allowed to do his work, and he must present whatever reports he has to present. Whoever is aggrieved, we have processes internally as the SABC, and also you can even go outside when you are not happy in terms of ensuring that you clear or you respond to the allegations. Therefore, we don't have to fight or kill one another, because there are processes available for all of us as South Africans, irrespective where we are, when we are aggrieved. The courts of law are there, and I think our judiciary is very independent. They are able to make independent judgment.
Okay,
so we must have faith.
Clarity will come then.
Yes, so even now with this, you have these 2 newspapers taking different position. I don't know. We will hear, and whoever is correct will be correct.
All right, Sunday Independent. If we go to the front page of that paper, we have quite a significant headline there. Ramaphosa misled Parliament. And in fact, the paper suggests that he did this inadvertently, but what he also did is, in the process, was involved in money laundering. And this is quite a claim. This is apparently in a letter that the Public Protector has sent to the presidency. Let me start with you, Mondli. Advocate Mkhwebane already kind of under fire. I suppose she has to get this one right, otherwise it's really just going to be perhaps a place she can't come back from.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, it's unfortunate. So the Sunday Independent has a leaked copy of the report that has been sent to the various parties, including the presidency, and it says he has been found guilty, and apparently it is going to be released publicly soon. What is unfortunate is that there is this cloud now hanging over the Public Protector's office, because she's had all these judgments going against her, and the institution does not have credibility that it used to have. And she could well be correct in some of the judgments that she has issued. The judgment against Pravin Gordhan, for instance, this judgment that this finding rather, that she has against the president. But now, because of the posture that she's taken, because of the weakness of the reports, because now she's perceived to be serving a faction of the ANC, it is now being seen as a political thing. And even those who may have erred can actually hide behind that now. And I think it is an unfortunate situation. But you know what? She's put herself in a position, and it has undermined such an important office, the standing of such an important office in our country. I think if Ramaphosa has something to answer for here, he has to answer for it, and we can't keep always just shooting at the messenger. Public protector.
Sophie, your thoughts on this?
You know what? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Advocate Thuli Madonsela at some point in time was experiencing the same pressures, selective amnesia, and we have forgotten how she was aggrieved. You know, even politicians lambasting her. They didn't give her a chance, but later she was a darling. My problem is, even during her time, some reports were leaked, and that's why people were complaining even then. And now we have a similar situation. The question is, those who set up this institution must go back and check whether we have done enough to ensure that that office is protected. But secondly, parliamentarians who are responsible for the process of appointing a public protector, when they do that, they must be very convinced that the person will do a good job. And as the person is doing her job or his job, he or she must be protected by the same parliament. Now let's go back to Mkhwebane. Do we still remember who presented her name? People have forgotten. Secondly, do you remember who supported her name in Parliament?
Everybody except the DA,
Except no. Even the ANC, there were reports that they wanted Judge Desai.
Right.
And now he's being perceived as an ANC faction person, but they didn't raise his name. Secondly, the EFF supported Mkhwebane because they felt he was a young person, and apparently she was convincing during the interview. But later, of course, they did have a problem with her, you know, but they are back again supporting her work. So is it supporting an individual or supporting the office? And then the issue of the DA has been consistent.
Yeah.
They didn't want Mkhwebane. They don't want Mkhwebane now. So as we report as journalists, we must go back and say, but how did we end up with this public protector? What were the issues? And maybe we will be able to tell a better story.
We watched it all.
Yes.
So just we're wrapping this up. I want to bring up that paper once again, the Sunday Independent, and there's something there that caught my eye. And the headline reads, Ramaphosa misled Parliament. Can you see that misled is in inverted commas? Now, the thing about that for me is that that's what people are going to see on the billboards as they're driving. But when you read it, it says inadvertently misled. So I don't know whether this is a naughty mechanism that's being deployed, because reading that, it sounds as fact. But when you say inadvertently, it means something else.
Yeah, I think it is a case for the Ombudsman that the Ombudsman may have to look at, because I mean, like, it is when you obviously inadvertently you cannot fit into a headline.
Yes.
So I mean, but there it is impact. I mean, like when you say,
but by putting it in inverted commas, they're almost protecting themselves.
Yeah, but also you are saying that the public protector said he misled Parliament, and you're actually excluding the context, and the qualification.
I don't want to make any comment on this. I don't have a report. I don't have a report. As a journalist, for you to make a fair comment, you must have something on paper.
Right.
I don't have a report. What if tomorrow Mkhwebane comes out and say, I don't arrive at that conclusion? You see? So good luck to those who have the report, and perhaps they are better journalists. But for now, I don't have a report. But we can only make factual comments when we have the report. And how did she arrive at that? But secondly, remember, whoever is mentioned or found wanting in terms of the public protector's report, you still have a recourse. So it's not at the end.
In 30 seconds, I just want to, because a number of significant journalists passed away this past week, and I don't know if you can just share in 30 seconds some of what you remember of some of them.
Well, there was a great guy, great journalist, a legend called Raymond Lowe, and who was a champion for media freedom and freedom of expression in South Africa. 93 years old, he was still going very strong, and he made a huge mark in terms of the struggles that he fought. There was Herbert Mabuza, who was one of the most famous and one of the most critical photographers of the past 3 decades. He also passed away. And obviously Zepi Molefe, a City Press legend, he also passed away. It was a bad week for our craft.
One gets a sense that a generation, an era is disappearing.
Yes, when you look at what has transpired for the past few years in terms of political leaders who had passed on, you look at media as well. You are saying a particular generation is beginning to leave this world, and a particular layer must step in. And it was indeed a great loss for the media fraternity.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there. Both of you, thank you so much. Sophie Mkwenya, Modli Makanya, thank you so much for coming through. And you at home, thank you so much indeed for watching Media Monitor. Join us again at the same time next week for more of the same. From me and the team, have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.